There are two schools of thought when it comes to gain staging while tracking, and one of these ways makes it much harder to mix, and the other way makes it much easier. So let's break them all down today. In my last video where I was going over the cons of mixing with hardware and going over how I deal with these different things and how I handle these difficulties, there were a lot of you that were asking for the video on gain staging. The first school of thought when it comes to gain staging while tracking is to adjust the preamps on everything that you record so that way your faders in your DAW can stay at unity, and when you're done tracking everything, a basic rough mix will play out. Now, usually what this means is you would track your drums kind of loud hitting your interfaces. You would track your vocals kind of loud hitting your interfaces, but maybe you have like a synth pad that's meant to be way in the background in the verse and the quiet sections of the song. Well, then you would record that synth pad very quietly. The level that it's hitting your converters would be very quiet, so that way you can leave all the faders at unity when you're done and get a rough mix playing back when you're completely done tracking. Now, this approach is generally taken by tracking engineers in big studios where they're tracking real bands, and this is a really common way for people to work in big studios with consoles. But tracking everything this way has some real serious drawbacks when it comes to gain staging for mixing. So you get ready to mix your song in which you've recorded everything so that way your faders stay at unity for a rough mix, and now that vocal that you tracked really loud, you send that to a compressor, plug-in or hardware, it doesn't really matter. And that vocal is hitting that compressor appropriately right out of the gate because it was recorded kind of loud. It's at a very good, reasonable volume. And so when you slap that compressor on, hardware or software, it's already in its normal operating range and you can do what you need to with the compressor. But that soft synth pad that we recorded that's supposed to be quiet in the mix, now when you send that synth pad that was recorded very quietly to a compressor, well, now it's not in a range where it will trigger the compressor to do anything at all. And so then you have to play around with inputs and outputs on your compressor and crank the input on the compressor so that way there's enough level going into the compressor so that way the compressor can start compressing, and then you can adjust your compressor to do what you need it to do. So while you can get basically the same results tracking and gain staging like this, it creates several more steps when it comes time to mix. So I want to go over the way that I gain stage while tracking and how I gain stage when mixing, so that way hopefully it will help some of you out. Before I do that, there are links down below to every piece of gear that I use. Those links go to Sweetwater. Sweetwater is sponsoring this video, and I have gotten all of my gear from Sweetwater for a very, very long time. So you can check out every piece of gear that I use with the links down in the description. And you don't have to just pick up any of that gear. You can click on any one of my links anytime you need any piece of gear and buy anything it is that you need. It will go a long ways to help support this channel. So thank you very much, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. Links down below. Now, the second way that is extremely common for people to gain stage while tracking is to record everything as loud as you can without it clipping. This is my favorite approach. Now, I'm not pushing everything right up to the red the whole time because what you have to do is you have to anticipate if that singer is going to get a little bit louder than they did during when you were setting your levels, or is that drummer going to hit just a little bit harder than they did when you were setting the levels. So I always leave a little margin for error. I don't push it right up to the red, but I record everything at a moderately loud volume, hitting the converters. And this does a couple things. The first thing that this does is this uses all of the dynamic range of your converters, all of the bit depth that you're recording at. This gives you the maximum resolution and dynamic range that you can possibly have when you're using up the entire spectrum of volume hitting your converters. Now, let's be honest, most people could probably never hear the difference. I'm not even convinced that I can hear the difference, but on a technical level, this is how it works. And so recording hot into your converters, but making sure you don't clip, is just for sure the way to get the maximum sound quality that you can out of your converters. All of that great sound quality can be undone if you start clipping though, so make sure you leave enough room before it hits the red, so that way no matter how loud the performance gets, it never clips your converters. So I like this approach for tracking because of the benefits that I believe it gives me, but this also gives me some benefits when it comes time to mix. Now, recording every single instrument at roughly the same volume means that I don't ever have to adjust inputs into compressors or into plugins or hardware, that when I send a track to a compressor, plugin or hardware, it automatically is in the operating range that that compressor was intended to operate at. I don't have to adjust the input of any piece of gear because it was recorded too quietly or too loudly. It's just ready to go. Slap that compressor on. It's already in the ballpark of what I want it to do before I adjust a single thing. Now, if we really want to get down into the nitty-gritty of gain staging for mixing, I usually don't want my converters to clip when I'm sending stuff out to hardware. For the converters that I have used and for my personal tastes, I find that if I'm clipping the outputs of the converters going to my hardware, that I usually get more audible distortion. It's a character that I don't particularly love. But again, if I've recorded all my levels at an appropriate volume, I usually don't ever even have to worry about this. I slap the hardware insert on the track and it's already coming out my converters at a great usable level. It's already not clipping because I didn't clip it when I was recording it, and it's also not too quiet because I didn't record it quietly. Now on the way back in, so we've come out through our, let's say a drum bus. Let's say we have a drum bus and we put a compressor on our drum bus. Now on the way out, I don't want it to clip. But then that signal comes out of my converters, it hits my compressor, and then goes back into my converters. Sometimes I will let this clip, especially on drums. Sometimes clipping the input of a converter post-processing, post-compression, it can be a pleasing sound. And I'm not talking clipping real hard, I'm talking like 1 or 2 dB, just enough that the lights are turning red on the interface at the loudest points of the song. I don't do this on every song, but sometimes on really aggressive stuff, it can sound cool to clip the converter just a little bit coming back in. Because don't forget, we should be mixing with our ears, not our eyes. If it sounds good, it is good regardless of what you see. Now coming out of my hardware back into the converters, when I'm mixing, I adjust the levels exactly the same as when I'm tracking. I want the levels to hit, unless I'm purposely clipping something, I want the vocals, say, to come out of that compressor and hit my converter at a loudest volume possible while making sure it's not clipping. So this is really just how I adjust everything. There's not much trickery to it. It's pretty straightforward, but those are the 2 schools of thoughts, and that is the basic general rules or ways that you should gain stage your productions. I hope it helped you. Drop me a comment, let me know if this did help you or if you have a different opinion. And as always, don't forget, down in the comments, let's help each other out. If you see someone down in the comments asking questions, do your best to help them out. Let's create a community here in which we can all help each other out. It's just the right thing to do to be a good person and to give a helping hand out when we can. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit me up on Instagram and everywhere else. Links down and below for everything I used. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.